Hello. Okay, we're on page 652, the very bottom. And this is my bedroom. It's a little bit there probably should be something on the wall, on this wall, but there's not. So don't judge me too much. Let's see how I'm gonna arrange this. I should have done this before I started. I'm gonna put you on a blanket. In 1855. Okay, wait. Actually, sorry. I'm going to put you on this blanket. Okay, here we go. Page 652. In 1855, Castle Clinton was transformed into the landing station for the flood tide of immigrants from Europe. For 35 years, it would be the nation's gateway, the place at which almost 8 million human beings, in flight from persecution or poverty or famine in the old country, came ashore in a land of opportunity. Most important, though the old fort was, in 1939, well into the second century of its existence. The old fort, we're talking about that one random building in Battery Park that had a bunch of history, and people were like, we can't have a highway here because of the history that's in this one fort. That's what we're talking about. Most important, though the old fort was, in 1939, well into the second century of its existence, part of the city's past, it was also, as the aquarium, part of the city's present, very much part. Its walls were filled with history, but they were also filled with life. Some idea of the popularity of the aquarium may be gleaned from its average annual attendance, 2,500,000. It was by far the most heavily attended public institution in New York. It was free, easily accessible to all the city, and with its giant turtles, spear-shaped, hideously spotted morays, randomly calling the morays hideous, barking seals swimming in its gloomy depths, it had delighted generations of New York children. Sunshine, serenity, a sense of sea, a sense of history. Build the bridge that Robert Moses wanted to build, and they would be accessible to the streets of Lower Manhattan no longer. Build that bridge, and the vista of New York Harbor would be destroyed, the majestic harbor sweep thrown into shadow, the sheer rising skyscraper mass slashed in half and blocked, one of the wonders of the world turned into mere, rather unimportant backdrop for just another East River bridge, not very different from the three others just behind it. Hello. We're talking more about why people don't want Robert Moses to build a highway in Lower Manhattan, like Battery Park area. And plunk down in Battery Park a half dozen or more solid masses of concrete, each as big as an office building, and set on top of the park, a road bed 8 lanes wide, 2 lanes wider than the bridge. And there wouldn't really be a park anymore. What had been a place of sunlight and grass would become a place of concrete and steel and shadows. Instead of quiet, there would be, directly overhead, the roar of traffic. Instead of vistas of water, there would be only glimpses snatched between pillars. There wouldn't even be a sense of history. The old fort would be partially hidden by giant road piers. One would, under Moses's plan, be placed smack in front of it, and thoroughly dwarfed, no longer a monument bulking impressively at the end of a broad mall, filling the park with its presence, but a tiny ornament, cute but unimportant, cowering beside the immense pillar, lost in the shadow of the giant roadway above, its silence not majestic but meaningless among the noises of a new age thundering down from the big highway above. Hello. Build the bridge that Robert Moses wanted to build, and, quote, a prospect unexcelled by any city view in the world, would become little more than an extension of the mean streets of Lower Manhattan. The park had once been an escape from those streets, the only escape. Now there would be no escape from them at all. Only someone thoroughly familiar with Lower Manhattan could appreciate fully what would be done to the area, and to the 500,000 people who spent their days in it, by the bridge that Robert Moses wanted to build. But New York's reformer aristocrats possessed that familiarity, and they determined to stop him from building it. Because they did, the fight over the Brooklyn Battery Crossing marked the end of Moses's long alliance with New York's good government movement, with the reformers in whose ranks he had, as a young man, once marched himself. The identity of the two men who led the opposition to the bridge spotlighted this aspect of the confrontation. George McAnany was one of the, I almost read it as McEnemy, but that would be also appropriate. George McAnany was one of the heroes of Moses' young manhood, the early crusader for civil service reform who, in 1909, had risked his hard-won business success. Not one of the wealthy reformers, he was a poor boy from Jersey City who had left school at the age of 15 to become a reporter on the Old World. And the World is a publication, the New York World. Not a reporter reporting about the old world. The new world, the old world. Okay, so anyway, so George McAnany had risked his hard-won business success to lend the weight of his reputation and that of the city club of which he was president to a Bureau of Municipal Research expose, and thus persuaded Governor Charles Evans Hughes to oust corrupt Tammany officials. Borough president himself thereafter, a peppery, tart public official, he, rather than John Perroy Mitchell, could have had the Fusion mayoral nomination in 1917, but declined it because he felt Mitchell, as an incumbent, had a better chance of defeating Tammany. Lack of funds later forced him to retire from public office, but he never retired from public service. An early believer in city planning, he was the moving force behind the city's adoption of the first comprehensive zoning plan in the U.S. Some indication of the respect in which he was held was his appointment in 1916 as executive manager of the New York Times. The title was meaningless, and during the 5 years he held the job, he never had a specific function. Times patriarch Adolph S. Ox hired him. Ox told friends to act as, quote, a sort of moral background for the paper. He aged fast physically. In his 60s, he was strikingly wrinkled and shrunken. He had to hobble on a cane when he came to meetings. But he came. It was he who, in 1935, decided the city should have a World's Fair, and it was he who told Moses the location should be Flushing Meadows Park. Quote, parentheses, in quotes. Bob Moses was very amicable in those days. I said to him, we have a great idea and we want your help. Then I told him what it was, and he thumped the desk and said, by God, that is a great idea. And in 1939, at the age of 70, McAnany was president of the Regional Plan Association and a key member of a dozen other organizations. Stanley M. Isaacs, a contemporary of Robert Moses, was born of the same stock, wealthy, Jewish, and dedicated to public service. What Moses' parents were to Madison House, Isaac's father, a pious Orthodox Jew, was to the Educational Alliance and the Citizens Union. Like Robert Moses, Stanley Isaacs was a hiker, a mountain climber, and a brilliant student, top man in his class at Columbia. And like Moses, he was a leader of men. Quote, I can talk my head off to a room full of people, and when Stanley walks in, they melt away from me and surround him, a cousin said. In his youth, moreover, Isaacs apprenticed himself to the same principles to which Moses had apprenticed himself in his youth. As a young real estate lawyer, he spent evenings and weekends working for reform, doing legwork not only for his local Republican organization, he was elected district leader at 22, but for a succession of fusion tickets, as Moses had, in 1921, served as secretary of a fusion campaign committee. As Moses concentrated on a particular field, civil service, and made himself an expert in it, Isaacs concentrated in his youth on public housing and made himself an expert in it. And as Moses spent 4 years of his youth trying to accomplish something significant in his field, only to suffer disappointment, Isaac spent 4 years of his youth trying to accomplish something significant in his field with the same results. From 1925 to 29, as chairman of the Housing Committee of the United Neighborhood Houses, he led the campaign for a law that would require slum landlords to provide their tenants with such amenities as windows and toilets. When, in 1929, his pleading finally embarrassed the legislature into passing a new multiple dwelling law, the statute was so watered down that it was virtually meaningless. But Stanley Isaacs remained true to his stock and his principles. His loyalty to friends and family was legendary. When his brother Julian was desperately ill with tuberculosis, Isaacs spent months in Saranac, cooking his meals and nursing him. Proud of being Jewish, he was active in Jewish philanthropies for 40 years. What social worker Helen M. Harris called, quote, his passion for social justice, never burned low. Neither private nor political career ever prevented him from working for the causes of his youth. He served as president of United Neighborhood Houses for 25 years. By carrying a workload of mosaic proportions, Quote, he has daily habits that would assassinate another man, a profiler wrote about Stanley Isaacs. He was active most of his life in 23 separate good government or charitable organizations, and he didn't abandon his fight for his first cause as Moses had abandoned the fight for his. Stanley Isaacs would be a leader in the fight for better housing for more than 30 years after his 1929 defeat. And although the techniques of the reformer, free and open discussion, persuasion, education, had caused him only disappointment, and were over and over to cause him disappointment again, he never abandoned them for the techniques of the politician. Robert Moses may have no longer believed that the principle is the important thing, but Stanley Isaacs did. In 1937, after Isaacs had been working for the public for 30 years without ever holding public office, he was nominated, against his wishes, on the LaGuardia ticket for Manhattan Borough President, McAnany's old post. And when Isaacs was elected by more than 40,000 votes, after one quietly spellbinding campaign speech, LaGuardia, hugging him, exclaimed, "I don't know where you've been so long, Stanley." He demonstrated that neither position nor power would change his beliefs in what was important. He refused, to the point where his feelings became a family joke, to use his official limousine except on official business. He fired scores of political hacks and replaced them with a team of crack engineers. And he proved that there might occasionally be other ways of getting things done than Moses's. It was Borough President Isaacs who built, without antagonizing the neighborhood, the East River Drive. Refusing to use his office for patronage himself, he refused to let anyone else use it for patronage either. He faithfully cleared his appointments with LaGuardia, but rejected the mayor's suggestions if they were based on political considerations. Declining to fill positions he did not consider necessary, he reduced the borough president's staff by 90 positions and his budget by more than 25%. To avoid embarrassing the other borough presidents, the Board of Estimate each year gave him more money than he asked for. At the end of the year, he returned the surplus. George McAnany was a man whom Robert Moses had admired. Stanley Isaacs was the man whom Robert Moses had once been. And they're about to have a showdown. Throughout Moses' career, McAnany and Isaacs had supported him, as had most of the other leaders of New York's good government movement. In 1919, when he had needed their money and the prestige of their great names to accomplish his reorganization of the state government, in 1924, when they gave him statewide power by electing him chairman of the State Council of Parks, in 1933, when, after their attempt to make him mayor had failed, they had helped persuade the man who did become mayor to bring him to power in the city. In 1935, when they had supported him against the president. In every great crisis of Robert Moses's 20-year-long public career, in the face of every threat to his plans or to his power, the reformers had given him their support. They had done so because they had believed that Moses, who had been one of them once, was one of them still, because they believed that his aims were still their aims, that the things he wanted to get done were the things they wanted to get done. They thought of him, in fact, as their champion, as the young recruit who had risen from their ranks to become the one among them capable of leading to victory the causes for which they had all marched. They had refused to listen to the handful among them who had tried to tell them what Moses was doing to the city. The American Scenic and Historic Preservation Society had, in fact, just awarded Moses its highest honor, the Society Gold Medal. But the Battle of the Battery Crossing, staged on terrain familiar and dear to them, was to give them a close look at Moses's values and thus to show them that those values were no longer their values, that they were, in fact, utterly incompatible with the values they knew must be preserved in the city they loved. The Battle of the Battery Crossing was, moreover, to show them that the means Robert Moses employed were as incompatible with their principles as his ends. The Battle of the Battery Crossing. New York's reformers had never gotten a first-hand look at his methods. Before 1934, he had operated only inside the city. In the 5 years he had been operating inside, his projects had never directly affected more than a few of them at a time. When those few had tried to tell the others about their experiences, they had not generally been believed. Maybe, one of the reform leaders was to say, idolizing him like we didn't want to believe. But they were going to have to believe now. For now, Moses' methods were going to be used against them. Throughout his career, Moses had charmed people he needed, and then, as soon as he didn't need them any longer, he had turned on them. He had always needed the reformers because he had always relied on public support, and they were, in many ways, the key to that support. But now, thanks to his discovery of the possibilities of the public authority, he didn't need public support any longer, and therefore he didn't need them. And now, when they decided to fight his bridge proposal, he turned on them. At first, not yet realizing with what they were dealing, believing that Moses had made an incorrect decision, but that he could be made to see that the decision was wrong and what would therefore correct it, feeling, in other words, that he would be amenable to reason, they tried to reason with him, requesting meetings at which they could explain their objections. He did not even reply. Bye. Have a good weekend. The reformers were disturbed, but not yet worried. The government of their city was, after all, a government of laws, not of men, and there were ample laws to ensure against the construction of a public work on the whim of any one man, even if that man was supported by the mayor. There were laws, procedures, and public bodies established to ensure that the will of the public would determine whether a public work was to be built, and, if it was, what its design would be. The will of the public might not be heard if the public most directly concerned was some local housewives group or chamber of commerce. They admitted, but they believed their will would always receive the fullest of hearings. They had at their command the technical expertise to examine Moses' proposal in detail and determine the facts for themselves, and they had influence enough to ensure that these facts would be published. The facts certainly deserved publication. According to Moses' attractively printed brochure, the Brooklyn Battery Crossing should be a bridge, primarily because a bridge, quote, with all necessary approaches, would cost less than half as much as the tunnel, $41 million compared to $84 million. Thus, the brochure stated, the bridge with necessary approaches can be financed by the sale of bonds to the public without the contribution of a nickel of city or federal money. And according to the brochure, these figures were indisputable because the estimate for the bridge had been prepared by its designer, Othmar Ammann, the estimate for the tunnel by its designer, Ole Singstad. Singstad had found that last statement interesting. No estimate he had ever prepared showed the cost of the tunnel to be $84 million. His estimate, an estimate given to Moses when Moses asked for it, showed the cost to be $65 million. Utterly affordable. The reformers had found Moses' statement incredible. He said the bridge, including all necessary approaches, would cost $41 million. One approach alone, the elevated highway in Brooklyn, was, they knew, going to cost $12 million. Even without figuring in the cost of the Manhattan approaches, that left $29 million for construction of the bridge proper. That figure was ridiculous on its face. The Bronx-Whitestone Bridge, half as long and 4 lanes instead of 6, had cost $39 million. Moses stated he had gotten the bridge estimates from Ammann, designer of Whitestone. Knowing the famed Swiss engineer's reputation for integrity, the Citizens Union decided to find out if Moses' statement was accurate. 2 representatives called on Ammann in his office. The engineer, normally so terse and positive, met their questions with finger-twisting silence. Finally, he told them that while, as some of them put it, he didn't want to be involved, he would, quote, give us some guidance, which established them to report to the Citizens Union Board of Directors that the $41 million figure was not accurate at all. The board asked Paul Wendels, a personal friend of Ammann's. Paul Wendels knows everyone. I don't even understand what the deal is with Wendels. So the board asked Paul Wendels to ask Ammann if he would confirm the report. The report was confirmed. So we have confirmation that this Ammann guy didn't actually say the number that Moses is saying that he said. Moses' brochure had stated that the bridge and all necessary approaches could be built without a nickel of city money. Stanley Isaacs had read the brochure with care, and as a result, he was not worrying about a nickel of city money. He was worrying about 430 million nickels, $21,500,000. Isaacs had noticed that while the attractively drawn map in the attractively drawn brochure showed the indispensable corrections between the bridge and the West Side Highway, whose southern terminus at the time was Duane Street, more than a mile away. And with the East River Drive, the cost of these connections was not included in the estimates. Walter Binger estimated the cost of the West Side extension at $11 million, that of the East River Drive at $7,500,000. Moses had stated that he would rebuild Battery Park after it had been torn up for the bridge approaches, but he had not included the cost of rebuilding in his estimates either. Binger said it would be $3 million. Okay, I know that was only 20 minutes, but I think I'm going to stop there. Goodbye. Have a good weekend.